Welcome to Resilience Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Osterlink. This show is about building better humans, institutions, and systems. On the show, I'll be interviewing many different experts from across many different fields, including human optimization, health and fitness, team building, mind-body medicine. In the institutional space, we're looking at different institutions and how we can create new ones, new models and maps, including in medicine, in education, in intelligence community, in law enforcement, in the military, especially in the special operations community. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Dr. Joshua Phillips. Joshua received his PhD in speech communication from Southern Illinois University with additional graduate work in women's studies, and his academic work sits at the intersection of rhetoric, intercultural communications, media, race, sports, poverty, and sexual violence. What's compelling about Joshua is not just the breadth of scholarship, but the way he bridges intellectual rigor with lived human realities. As a PhD student, he published 15 academic manuscripts, earned multiple top paper awards, and delivered more than 50 keynote presentations across the United States and Canada. He's the author of the book Homeless: Narratives from the Streets, which emerged from his dissertation research and explores homelessness through deeply human stories rather than abstract statistics. His work also examined topics ranging from media narratives and public discourse to race, masculinity, sports, gender, violence, and cultural forces shaping modern identity and communication. Outside the academy, Joshua remains deeply engaged in community work, facilitating workshops in homeless shelters and women's shelters, while also serving as an assistant wrestling coach for a local high school. This is a conversation about culture, communication, human dignity, narrative, and the stories society chooses to amplify or ignore. Dr. Joshua Phillips, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you. And as we're talking offline, I love what I'm reading about your thinking and work on Twitter. That's where I originally found you. So it's cool to actually put a face and a name in the body to work over on social media. In reading your bio, you cover a lot of topics, intellectual topics. Like, what led you to want to explore so many interesting, seemingly diverse topics? But reading what you write, I see you integrate and connect the dots between seemingly disparate topics.
So my academic focus, and this will help kind of get us to the question, is rhetoric. So I'm a rhetorician, and what that means is that I study the ways in which the messages that sort of surround us in culture, how do they persuade us to act, behave, speak, etc. So a lot of things, sort of how we all individually act, is through mimicking the language that we hear, or we are being persuaded, not just by speeches and politicians, but we're being persuaded by pop music, the movies that we see. The way that's easy to think about this is little kids sort of acting out the heroes and heroines of Disney movies. So the messages are always kind of, we live in stories. We are constantly consuming messages, and then we are sort of acting those things out. So that's what I really get interested in, is how do people act and behave? And it's probably based on the types of stories and messages that they've been surrounded with. And so now we need to have a conversation about what types of stories do we want to amplify in the culture to get people to act, behave certain ways. What sorts of stories might we want to minimize or put on the sidelines because we don't like the direction that culture is going? When it comes to sort of, we can get into some of like the political stuff. I do some political research. I'm not a political scientist, but I do get really interested when it comes to how is it that two neighbors who are very similar for all intents and purposes, similar income, their kids go to the same school, etc. How is it that they have very different political beliefs or worldviews about the politics that are going on in, let's say, the United States right now? And when you look at things like, what do they consume? Does this person consume a lot of Fox News? Does this person consume a lot of MSNBC News? What sort of podcast are they listening to? And you start to realize those constant messages, that 24/7 news cycle, whether it's on television or podcast or reading books or the online websites they're visiting, those are shaping the ways in which they are having conversations or seeing the ways that politics are being played out in society. And so, yes, you can have very similar people with regard to their day to day, the schools they go to, the income, the jobs they work. They move through the world very differently, and they are having different conversations because of these messages that they are consuming.
It's not surprising it's called television programming.
Yeah, that is a great, yeah, that is a great connection. Yes.
Yeah. So why rhetoric? What led you to want to study that in the first place?
I I've always been interested in culture and people, from various, yeah, just from various backgrounds. I double majored as an undergrad, and the second major I picked up was just on world religions. So I just wanted to study a bunch of religions because obviously, kind of all around the world, the religion that you are steeped in, as far as like the country you're from, it really does. It shapes so much of your day to day life. Um, in the United States, kind of in the West these days, we're a little bit religion is more of a sub story of our larger stories, but so often, so many places all over the world, religion is very central. Obviously, in the West, in the United States, religion was far more central than it is today. Um, and so I just got really interested in like what would it be like to grow up in as a person who grew up in India surrounded by Hinduism, or grew up in the Middle East surrounded by Islam, or grew up in where in Japan surrounded by Buddhism. I just got really interested in sort of like how does that affect the everyday culture that sort of builds the society, and so that's kind of how I came to, yeah, a sort of larger appreciation of trying to understand different cultures. When you kind of get into some of the other research I do when it comes to sort of, let's say, subgroups or different cultures within the United States, uh, yeah, I mean, people in rural America are very different than people who live in New York City, and surrounding themselves with a different story of what it means to be an American or what does it mean to live a life, generally speaking. And yeah, so that's how I really got interested in this. People are I like people. I like interacting with people. I like interacting with people who are very different than me, and then sort of realizing, I'm a human being, you're a human being, but we have just very different views or different experiences. How is it that two people who are of the same species have arrived at different you know have arrived at different lives, have taken on different jobs, have different political beliefs, religious beliefs, etc. Um, and so that's really kind of what drew me into this idea of rhetoric. Like, what stories are people being consumed with, or stories are they consuming? And then they're acting it out. And that's how people kind of end up where they do in life. And that has always just, that's fascinated me for a long time.
Speaking of stories, I'm curious on your take on this. Like you talk about traditional religious views, Hinduism in India, Buddhism in Japan, or Shintoism in Japan, et cetera, et cetera. When countries go from traditional to modern and some from modern to postmodern, talk about like what you notice in terms of the forces that influence how one understands the world they live in, and how they make meaning of the world they live in. Because
Yeah.
traditionalism and postmodernism are like three interesting competing forces in the world today.
Yeah. I think the best way for me to answer that is with one of the statements that I bring up with my undergrad, most of my freshman classes when they come in, and we sort of do a larger discussion on just what are the humanities. And one thing that I emphasize with them is that the world was not created the day you were born. um,
Fair enough.
and so I think some of the difficulties, I don't know, maybe we can say problems, but some of the difficulties with like a postmodern view, is it's very in the it does a lot of it does a lot of study of the present moment and sort of like where do we want to be in the future, uh and that doesn't account for sort of how did we get here in the first place. And so even if cultures around the world are becoming more secular, that you still can't disregard, let's say, their religious undertones that kind of got them here. And so, I mean, you're on X, I'm on X. We see these debates all the time. I recently saw it just a few days ago. when people are arguing whether or not, the United States of America, or England are a Christian nation. And there were people, the argument that I saw people having where there were people saying, no, the United States is not a Christian nation, but it was very much like in the present, like a lot of people aren't sort of like living out Christian values, let's say. There were other people, and they were speaking past each other with this debate because the other people, the more traditional people, were trying to make the point of, even if people aren't practicing, let's say, Christianity in the United States as much anymore, it's become more secular. That doesn't, you can't disregard the sort of underpinning foundations of all of our institutions that were obviously influenced by it. Um, and so, yes, we might live in a more secular world today, but to ignore some of the religious foundations of any culture around the world, whether it's Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or what have you, just to ignore some of the uh, religious ideas that got sort of put into our foundational laws, education systems, governments, etc., is to do a is to do a great disservice to our understanding of the world today. And I think that's one of the sort of blind spots, I think you might be able to say, with postmodernism, because it does just get to like what's happening right now and how can we sort of change it for the future. And I don't think sort of changing culture on a dime is that easy, because because the foundations and the roots of culture are so deep. Um, yeah, with regard to whether it's the religious traditions or the political traditions or the legal system or the stories that we've told. So this gets into like my discussion on just like the Western canon in general. Uh,
We get to for sure.
yeah,
Yeah. But I could imagine you could take that way of thinking and even apply it to traditional religious systems. Like Christianity, for instance, didn't start out from scratch. Obviously, Judaism was a foundation for Christianity, but you can actually look at Christianity and say, well, there's pagan influences there too. Like
yeah,
Easter is a great example, like, or Christmas, at least the way we celebrate it. There's a lot of
yeah,
pagan. So it's interesting. Like there's almost like there's no zeros. There's no originals. I mean, I have to imagine there's an original time period that everything
yeah, yeah,
did, but like it's hard to say this is it, and then it goes forward from there. There's always there's always
yeah,
forces influencing even the creation of something seemingly new.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Completely agree with you on that. And so yeah, I mean that's just generally again sort of like my freshman students coming into the humanities, like what are we doing here? Um, and yeah, I mean I try to take them on this sort of like this journey through time, with regard to like you live in the world now. My freshman students now born around 2008 ish. Um, I know. Yeah, they were born around 2007, 2008. Um, and so it's just like let's talk about the world you live in and um, how it came to be. And it'll just give you a deeper appreciation for, it'll give you a deeper appreciation for your history. It'll give you a deeper appreciation for your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, all the people who did all the hard work to sort of make life as stable like as stable as it is today in 2026. Yeah, you just have a greater appreciation for all the hard work that had to go into the institutions you currently get the privilege of living in.
That's very important to remember that the privilege we have to living in them and all
Yeah.
the work that led to create them. One of the themes around the show is on resilience, creating resilient humans, resilient relationships, teams, resilient systems and institutions. And one of the things I noticed looking at various systems and institutions is that most of them are no longer robust, if they even
Mhm.
including academia. Like I'm watching the younger generation seemingly become less educated, and that's it's a problem for any one individual, but it's also a problem if this is true, at least for our society at large, for a long term, not only survival, but I mean not for thriving, but let's just survival purposes. And as a professor, like, what do you notice, having done this for a while? What do you notice in terms of the new students coming in and their cognitive and emotional capacities?
It's hard to ignore the COVID factor. Obviously, you can have a correlation versus causation argument as to whether or not that disruption in their education, whether or not that sort of stopped some sort of like the emotional maturity progress of sort of getting into the classroom. It might have. Uh, Unfortunately, I think some of the things that I'm seeing now that I didn't see uh, 10 years ago, uh, students are less well read. Um, they are less willing to engage with, let's say, like an entire book. Because I also coach wrestling at the high school level, I've also done some coaching at the junior high level. So I've seen, students kind of coming up in that, seventh, eighth grade through high school stuff. I'll talk to them a little bit about their assignments, and some of the interesting things that I've heard anecdotally is teachers in those grades are moving away from assigning full books for students to read, and they're going to short stories. They're going to excerpts of books. I remember a couple of years ago, one of my classes, we were reading The Great Gatsby in my class to highlight a different point on sort of like complicated interpersonal relationships. Um, and a couple of my students had said, yes, we had read The Great Gatsby in high school. But one student in particular said that they were assigned The Great Gatsby, but they only read a few chunks of different parts throughout the book, because the only focus for The Great Gatsby for the week that they were looking at it was the symbolism and metaphor of the green light. And so, like, when the green light was kind of a part of the plot throughout the book, The Great Gatsby, it was like the teacher would assign, like, 5 pages here and then skip ahead, skip ahead. Here's another 10 pages to read, skip ahead, skip ahead. And so they didn't read the whole book. They just sort of, and so they missed out on all the other stuff of The Great Gatsby because the teacher just wanted to say, let's have a lesson on the green light. So I'm seeing that method of excerpts from books or summaries of books, or just let's just do short stories instead of full 300-page books. I've seen that more often coming through my classrooms of students who have not read a lot, who haven't read very deeply. And then they get to a college classroom, and I don't fault them. Um, but they moan and groan about, the books that are assigned or how much reading there might be in my class. Um, and that's definitely going to, hurt their long-term progress, with regard to their ability to kind of keep up with the material. And I mean, let's get away from like the just like the academic like point evaluation system. It takes away, just in an ideal sense, like what's the point of college? Like the sort of like human growth aspect. So whether or not you get an A in my class or a B in my class, the long term, when you're 30, that's irrelevant. But what should be relevant is like while you're in college, are you just trying to like deeply read great books, so that you can get a lot out of them, so that you can kind of start your adult life kind of on the right track with all of these great lessons that come out of these great books. And I think a lot of students miss out on that because of their inability to kind of sit and focus and read through. I mean, The Great Gatsby's, I don't know, what, 150 pages. Um, so relatively short, but students have difficulty just kind of sitting with a paper book in their hands quietly over the course of a few days. And I think that is a huge detriment just to like the value, the excitement that you can have for life, when you kind of understand these great books.
Like, probably a chicken and egg question. Is it that high schools and maybe middle schools are responding to children's, young adults' inability to focus? That's why they're shortening it. Or because they're shortening it, they're contributing to the children's or young adults' inability to focus? Probably a little bit of both, but like, why would we lower the standards that way? You have any thoughts on
Yeah. And this is a guess now. But some of the stuff that I've read, I think this is the conclusion that I would probably lean towards based on some of the research I've seen. In a unfortunate way, teachers have to teach to sort of like the lower quintile, the lower, 20-25% of the students in the classroom, to make sure that everybody kind of stays at pace in the room. And so if you have an English class, you're only able to move as fast as the lower 20-25% of the students in your classroom. Um, and so, yeah, if you have 25 or 30 kids in the classroom, it becomes difficult for like those students who are, excelling at reading. Um, you're going to sort of slow down their progress in reading too. And so instead of looking at those students and say, you all read the entire Great Gatsby, you look at the sort of students who aren't up to snuff yet, and you say, okay, these students can only handle some excerpts, so we're just going to assign excerpts to the entire class. And so I think kind of, over the course of like 20, 30 years of that, eventually it's, we're teaching to the lower 20%, 25% of class to make sure everybody kind of stays at pace. And you just kind of do that every year. It's like it just gets a little bit lower, a little bit lower, a little bit lower until all of a sudden, even your top performing students 30 years ago are now students who can barely make it through a book because of attention spans, because they haven't been challenged, they haven't been asked to read an entire book yet. So that becomes a problem. And I think that's probably the best explanation I've heard. Again, as far as like research, someone's going to argue with me, which is fine. But that explanation makes the most sense to me when it comes to why, when people talk about lowering standards or grade inflation, that explanation makes the most sense to me.
It's almost like an egalitarian impulse has led to what John Taylor Gatto would say is dumbing us down, literally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's unfortunate. Do you happen to have many foreign students come in, Europe, Asia?
Yeah, there's I mean, our campus is well representative. We're relatively small. There's only 1,000 students on my campus. I'm a satellite campus of Penn State University. So there's obviously the main campus out at University Park, and then there's uh, currently 19 smaller campuses all around the state. I'm at one of the smaller campuses. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, we have a good mix of students. We pull a lot of students from Philadelphia. The public transit system from Philadelphia makes it all the way to our campus. So students who live in Philly can come down here for their classes. Obviously, the Philadelphia suburbs. And yeah, we have a good mix of foreign students from multiple places around the world.
Do you find similar challenges with the foreign students as you have the Americans?
No, it's no, I haven't found any big difference with regard to uh abilities or the ability to keep up with the classwork. Um
Okay. Take
yeah,
first. Like,
yeah.
I understand in some, even like high schools, like in Europe, some of the other European countries, maybe the Japanese, maybe the Chinese, maybe some of the Middle Eastern countries too. Like their high schools teach what people in American colleges
Oh, yeah.
dumb themselves down like we have.
Oh, yeah.
But we're more well read. So I was curious, like
Yeah.
someone coming from a foreign country, are they more well read and it's easy for them to read a whole book and understand
Yeah.
content?
I haven't paid that much attention, so I wouldn't be able to maybe say anything definitively on that. Um I mean, there are ways in which students foreign students come in and to make sure that they're acclimated and they're ready to go. There are a lot of programs that are set aside specifically for this, so they can find a community. They can make sure that they're not just arriving at the United States and they're just kind of a person. They're just kind of out there by themselves. So there are a lot of sort of like multicultural clubs, foreign student clubs on the campus to make sure that students are acclimated. So probably is there's probably some interesting things to look at as far as sense of belonging. There's a little bit more possibly with like orientation or just kind of getting students ready for the classroom so they feel well prepared. Um, yeah, but yeah, I haven't paid much attention with regard to the reading stuff or the ability to kind of get through an entire book.
Interesting. Um, why do you think it's so important for young adults to be able to read classical books?
Yeah.
Their fullness.
Uh, yeah. uh, well, I mean, there is Chesterton's Fence. So for those unfamiliar, um, two guys walking down a country road. G.K. Chesterton says there's two types of people. One person's going to look at that fence and say, I don't like that fence. Let's tear down the fence. The other person looks at that fence and says, I don't know why that fence is there. I'm going to hesitate. I'm not going to tear down that fence until I totally understand the fence. So I think something with like the classical books, when you get people who say like, we don't need to read old books anymore, I kind of look at it as like a lot of very smart, important, powerful, influential people who have been with us for centuries, right? So not only like the founders of the United States, but the people who created like English common law, right, or Western civilization, they were reading all these books. And so they might be important and influential with regard to reading the books that the important people in history were reading. Famously, Alexander the Great kept a copy of the Iliad with him while he was kind of on his campaigns, right? Um, so understanding like these are books that very important people have read and kind of go back to throughout history. When it comes to like the founders, I mean, Frederick Douglass, kept a copy of the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare, right? And it's like, okay, like maybe these are important things when it comes to like things I should be reading, which a lot of, a lot of people, if people had no other books in their house, they had a copy of the Bible and they had a copy of the works of Shakespeare. So there's that. These books have been important to very important people. Let's not act like in 2026, all of a sudden we don't need them anymore. Um, the other reason with regard to, let's say, Western canonical books is you live in a culture, and that culture was created by stories. So those stories, the culture you live in has been influenced by the people who created the culture, right? The legal system, the government system, the education system, etc. They have been influenced by stories, and a lot of those stories can be found in books, whether it's biblical stories or Shakespeare tragedies. Cervantes, um, you know, Dante, Canterbury Tales, right? We can go on and on with the Greek plays, the philosophies, etc. Um, and so if you want to understand the culture you live in, you have to understand the people who built it. And the people who built it had a collection of books, and it's not a small list. It's relatively small to the amount of books that are available to us. But there's a pretty core group of books that most people would agree on, like the first 200, and then you kind of expand that out to about 2000, and about 2000 is where you get those 2000 important foundational books kind of in your head. That's going to be a really good place for you to start to kind of figure out these books have influenced the people who created the culture I live in. Obviously, books are influential. This idea going back to rhetoric, the stories I read are persuading me to do things or act certain ways. So those books influenced, and that's why it's important. If you want to understand the world you live in, you got to understand the stories that created it.
You had the chance to give us thought to how stories are transmitted and the effects on the transmission itself, meaning we sat around fires and we expressed like you learn stories verbally. And then eventually we had writing and reading that like different parts of the brain's activated to express stories. And you had radio, now you have television. Is that something that's crossed your mind? Like not what's being transmitted, but how it's being transmitted and the receptive sensory systems.
Yeah. There's something about a book um, that if a book, an average book, I don't know what the average time is, maybe 14 to 16 hours to kind of fully sit with that. Let's say over the course of like a week or two. um, that's going to do something more with regard to like getting inside of, your marrow, than watching a movie for an hour and a half. And then the next night you watch a different movie for an hour and a half, or you binge watch a show. And by the time you get to episode 5, you've kind of already forgotten episode 1 because you're going through it so quickly. With regard to, you and I connecting through Twitter, which I think has been fantastic for me. And I think if you use social media correctly, it gives you a lot of opportunities and avenues to meet very cool and interesting people. But I mean, yeah, the whole idea of doom scrolling, where people talk about they're scrolling through videos and all of a sudden an hour goes by and they don't remember anything that they looked at in the last hour because they moved through it so fast. Um, so yes, I do think you need to sort of fully sit with a book in this regard. There's something about the solitude of a book, reading a book, um, that because it takes a little bit longer and it takes a little bit more effort than some of the passiveness that can come about with either an audiobook or watching a movie or a TV show. Yeah, I think it's just going to kind of get into your brain a little bit more permanently than some of those other mediums that are available to us.
It's funny, as a somatically trained therapist, I'm thinking marrow gets in your, I need to with that one because I wonder if there's like a metaphor there or
Yeah.
reality. That's cool. You mentioned a little bit ago, like the 2000 books, and I'm not going to ask like, hey,
Yeah.
2000 books, but someone's listening to this. Let's just say a parent's listening to this.
Hmm.
Like, we want our child to be better educated than where the school system's going to provide for them. You know, where should they start? What are some of the books you recommend? And age specific, obviously.
Yeah. Well, this is a great question. So I posted about this today. Somebody had just kind of thrown out a random question. They had a son in middle school, and they said, like, what are some book recommendations for like a 13-year-old? And so you can get into things like, so let's say middle school, high school boys. A lot of Jack London, Call of the Wild. You probably get into some like shorter Hemingway, like The Old Man and the Sea, maybe Of Mice and Men. Um, so there's when you get into younger kids, I mean, all the Aesop fables, like kids should be reading those. Kids should also be reading kind of some of those illustrated books with like Bible stories. And again, even if like I get into this argument sometimes with folks too, even if you're not a Christian, if you live in the West, those stories obviously influence the culture you're in. So this isn't about, converting people. It's about letting them know, like, you live in this culture. You should understand some of the biblical references. There was a Princeton professor just a week or so ago who wrote some op-ed. I don't remember which magazine or newspaper it was in. But a Princeton professor was sort of lamenting that he was teaching his freshman students and they didn't understand sort of basic biblical story references. And this is Princeton. He's not teaching a religious class, but he's just sort of saying, like, this is a cultural literacy thing that students are unaware of sort of basic Bible stories. So for little kids, they should know basic Bible stories. Aesop's Fable, The Wind in the Willows is fantastic. Charlotte's Web, right? You get into middle school, especially with boys. So I'll go more in the boys' direction at the moment. A lot of adventure stories: Kipling, Jungle Book, Treasure Island, Swiss Family Robinson. Those were a lot of the stories I was reading. I was also from the Midwest originally. Mark Twain was like everywhere. My dad started reading Mark Twain to me and my brother when we were probably 10, 11 years old. We took a lot of trips, like, to a lot of towns along the Mississippi River, did a lot of that kind of stuff growing up. So that's really good. Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, those are good for middle school, high school kids. I have a joke with some of my friends. When you kind of get to late high school and then through college, you should be reading a lot of Fitzgerald. All right. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Steinbeck. And I also throw in there, and people give me a side eye for this one. I say read some Kerouac. I think, and it's like you should just have that, road trip adventure, a little bit of mild debauchery, perhaps. In your early 20s, me and my friends joke because we got into a lot of Kerouac in college, and then later in our 20s, we're like, I'm glad I read all this before I was 25. Because if you read Kerouac after 25, there's some problems. But you should just kind of have that sense of like road trip, Americana, adventure going on
Well, it's
when you're young.
the flip side of that. You read Ayn Rand when you're 18.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good.
I know.
Yeah. And I mean, even with like, I mean, Fitzgerald, like The Great Gatsby is one of my favorite books. But yeah, I mean, there's a time like, yeah, it takes place around a bunch of people who are kind of in their mid-20s. And it's like, you're kind of becoming a little bit disillusioned with corporate America. You've had your heart broken a little bit. You're going through this interesting transition time. You're still young enough to party, but you're also kind of transitioning into like this party scene is getting a little bit old. Um, yeah, that's a good time to read it. So those books, yeah, and again, like especially for young boys, it's like adventure books. Jack London, I mean, Call of the Wild is a very quick, short book for young kids. Um, Red Badge of Courage, that's a good one. Hatchet was brought up today when people were talking to me online about different books that young kids should read. Obviously, you can get into like the Narnia stuff, Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings might be a little bit, might be a little, maybe read it when you're a little bit older. Um, but if you're a parent, it's like that's Lord of the Rings. You can read it to your kids when they're younger. I don't know if a 10-year-old is going to be able to get through Lord of the Rings, but parents can read it to their kids. So those types of books. yeah, I think are great for kids. Like it's a sense of adventure. That's always, if nothing else, especially for young boys, give them books that give them a sense of adventure. Like they have to be what we sometimes call like action books. Like young boys have to feel like they can kind of act out the book. If we're giving young boys books that are about, quiet kids who sit in quiet rooms and have these like quiet conversations, yeah, young boys don't want to read that. It's like they want to be on a pirate ship. Like put those there, and there's pirate ship books, right? There are, yeah, there's books about treasure hunting and pirate stuff that are classic books that young boys can be reading.
Yeah, I'd be curious if anyone's ever looked at developmental psychological literature, like cognition goes through
Mhm.
certain developmental stages, emotionality, morality, and match it at one time with cultural,
Oh,
like what
yeah.
are seemingly appropriate for this stage of psychological, whether it's
Yeah.
or cognitive development. Because
Yeah.
are you familiar with anyone who's ever?
Not familiar, but yeah, I mean that is interesting. I'll throw this name out there, and your audience might be interested. Edie Hirsch. Have you heard of Edie Hirsch? Okay, so he's a professor emeritus now, at University of Virginia.
Okay.
So he's retired. But in like the late 80s, throughout the 90s, he did a lot of stuff in education where he started to put together these books about it was just very straightforward, like what students should know. And it was like a curriculum of just like important historical facts and dates and pieces of information that children should know sort of at each grade level. And he got a lot of pushback. He's been sort of ostracized by the more sort of forward thinking, social emotional learning, progressive education types. But his argument is, you can't have a kid graduate high school and not know what decade the Battle of Gettysburg happened in. Um, so it was like he was noticing his college students, and this was again back in like the 90s. He was noticing his college students just didn't have a grasp on some basic pieces of information, like who did we get independence from, 1776, and some of it, and he was like just dumbfounded that people weren't able just to kind of pull that piece of information out. And in that list of things that kids should know at each grade level, he does have some books as well. And again, just sort of from a cultural literacy point of view, yeah, I mean, we can have debates, but I think every American kid should read like To Kill a Mockingbird, Huck Finn, Charlotte's Web, and that because I get to this point, you have to have a culture that is somehow homogenized.
Yeah.
We have to have shared stories. If we don't have a shared origin story, 1776, founding fathers, etc. We don't have, and if we don't have sort of shared stories around the books that we all know, it's like I also read, Charlotte's Web, or I read Hamlet in, high school, or I have a basic understanding of whatever, Bible stories. Um, we can't kind of, you know, hold on to each other for a shared vision for the future. And so that's one of Hirsch's arguments. That's a lot of like when it comes to like the traditional classical education, people out there who are advocating for a more kind of core curriculum around some of this literacy stuff. That's in the vein of the argument that they're making is, how do you hold a culture together when everybody's kind of on this, choose your own adventure, like pick whatever book you want. Well, if you and I aren't reading similar books that are sort of cultural underpinnings, it's like, yeah, of course you're going to be like a divided country, later on in life. So people have to have some sort of shared cultural touchstones. Some of those touchstones are religious. Some of those touchstones are the books that we've read. I mean, even like one of those touchstones is the Super Bowl, right? And so you can have like more fun pop culture things. But when it comes to academics in school, we should have some sort of shared curriculum with the books that we have all read so that by the time we're, 25, 30 and we're hanging out at the office party together, it's like, yeah, we can have these casual conversations about, the books we read in school.
You had mentioned the Bible as one
Mhm.
example. Name some of the books earlier, like some of the Greek from the Greek tradition, some other much earlier books that were written that you think would be really good for not only young people to read, but older folks to read as well.
For older, like the
Or for anyone, anyone you'd be benefit from reading, including young people, but like anyone could read Homer and the Odyssey,
okay.
those kind of books. What
So Yeah. So like the books that I think, yeah, if people want to get kind of started on I don't know, like they want to take the next 2 years and they're like, I need some sort of foundational, like I missed a lot of these books.
Yeah.
I would say, start with Homer. So the Iliad, the Odyssey, and Virgil's the Aeneid.
Right.
Um, start with those three. Pick a couple of the Greek plays. All right. You should read a handful of Shakespeare's plays. Right. And it can be the ones that we all know, right? So you can be a total normie about it, right? It's like read Hamlet, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream. It's like pick pick a handful of Shakespearean plays. I would probably read Dante.
Okay.
Um I would read most of, if not all, the Bible. I would definitely tell people to read the entire New Testament, which, for those who are unaware, the New Testament is relatively short compared to the Old Testament. Get Genesis under your belt, and the Psalms perhaps from the Old Testament. But if you're like, I'm not going to read the whole Bible, like get to the main stuff, read the New Testament, and that'll give you a good sort of starting foundation. Um, Once you get through that, you probably want to read, a little bit of Jane Austen, so Pride and Prejudice, read some Charles Dickens, pick a Dickens book. When you get through American lit, it's like read Hemingway, um, read some Steinbeck. Uh, One of my favorite books from the 1940s is Richard Wright's Native Son, so I'm just going to throw that out there. I teach it in one of my classes. Um, but once you kind of have a nice solid foundation of that, oh, and I would say Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. Once you have a nice solid foundation there, because this is when people get into arguments like the Western canon, it's not diverse or it doesn't have books I like on it. There's plenty of lists online that kind of list out, 500 books from the Western canon. Once you get through some Homer, some Bible, some Shakespeare, some Dante, Mark Twain, and some Jane Austen, some Charles Dickens. Once you get through that over the course of a year, 2 years, then you really can sort of choose your own adventure from that canonical list, right? So if you really do like, I want the Greeks, I want to read, like, go back, and it's like there's so much more you can read with the Greeks, whether it's the plays or whether it's the philosophies of Aristotle, Plato. Um, or you can be like, you know what, I'm really interested in American lit. You can just dive into American lit and just read American lit, like from here on out. You can go English lit. For the people who say the canon isn't diverse enough, there's a huge list on the canon of literature out of Africa. So Chinua Achebe's "Things Fall Apart" is like probably the most well-known novel, out of the continent of Africa, which is, again, kind of makes my top, I don't know, 25 books list, novels. So there's are lots of African novels sort of on that list that you can get into. So you want to, just like, want to be a person who's like, I want to focus on female writers. Fine, like, you can do that. But yes, you do need that solid list of about probably 30 to 50 books, right? The Homer and the Bible and all that stuff I mentioned. And then you can say, okay, like Shakespeare's not really for me. I don't like this sort of epic poetry stuff. I'm not going to read it anymore. I am going to just sort of focus on, I don't know, you like do African American lit from like mid 20th century. It's like focus on like Baldwin, Richard Wright, Ellison, Langston Hughes. Like just dive into that for a few years on your own. But to go back to, it's like, why do you need that first 50 at all? You need that first 50 books, the Homers, the Shakespeares, the Bible, because so much of those first 50, you are going to start seeing those references pop up in the books later on. So the canon is a tradition that kind of all starts to work together. And if you don't have, let's say, a solid foundation of biblical reading, and this is what this Princeton professor was arguing a couple weeks ago, I mentioned that article that he wrote. It's really hard to dive into a novel that was written in mid 20th century. Let's say James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's hard to dive into that because there's so many religious themes and him speaking to religious ideas in Go Tell It on the Mountain. It's hard to get in that if you don't understand the Bible, right? There's so many books that make these sort of quaint little references to, let's say, Shakespeare. There's so many books that make interesting little references back to Homer. Um, and so, yes, they're part of the canon and they might be important to you. You should read them. But no, you do need a solid foundation of those sort of 50 books because so many later books speak back to those 50 books.
That makes a lot of sense. Are you are you feeling optimistic about our future? Where do because you're seeing the next generation come through you. You share with us some of the challenges you see just in terms of them learning and education.
Yeah.
Is positive trend? What's your assessment?
Um, I will be cautiously optimistic. I get a little bit worried. I mean, I've seen a big uptake interest in the canon, in longer form books, and people who are, um, the sort of Gen Z individuals who say, I want to reject my smartphone and I don't want to dive into AI right away. I'd like to get back to sort of paper and pencil. They kind of yearn for a nostalgia that they never experienced themselves. Um, I'm in like the mid millennial, so I've kind of, I didn't really do the computer stuff until I was in college. Um, it's like just like the constantly online, like I never grew up with that. So I've kind of been in both worlds. There's a lot of Gen Z people coming up who are just like, I don't remember never like, I can't remember a time when I just wasn't on the internet. Like, that just isn't a memory that ever had. They've constantly been connected to computers in the classroom. They constantly have to submit their stuff online. Like, this idea of like Canvas or Blackboard or whatever online, programs there are for your coursework. Uh, yeah, like I think students are starting to kind of look for ways to kind of get off their phones, off the social media. And yeah, there are some people out there who are kind of they're providing hope when it comes to giving people avenues or let's say making sure that conversations about great works in literature are continuing to happen. Um, yeah, so I feel optimistic that these little seeds are being planted, that small groups are forming in online spaces. Um, just about every semester, not every semester, but just about every semester, I kind of have like a little book club with some of my students. It's very informal. I just asked handful of students if they're interested, and then we kind of read a book over the course of the semester, unrelated to class. Um, so yeah, I see some people who I think we finally hit this sort of peak where students, Gen Zers, are getting to college and they're getting starting to graduate college and they're starting to realize that they missed out on something and they're not really sure what that something is. Um, and yeah, all of a sudden when you're 25, 26, you got your job, you're kind of moving away from the party scene. And you say, you know what? Like, I've heard this person named Jane Austen pop up a little bit in some pop culture conversations. I don't know who that person is. Maybe that's a book I probably should have read. And so I'm going to go pick up Pride and Prejudice. Um, so those little things I think start to kind of, yeah, pique people's interest. And so I'm hopeful that yeah, some of the younger generation folks, um, if they're getting a little bit worried, like maybe I missed out on something, I hope they start to kind of lean into it, um, a little bit more and realize there's this whole world out there that they can explore.
Love to hear that. And it just some of my younger clients, I'm seeing that too. Like there's interest in physical books. There's interested in like analog life a little bit, like not always
Yeah,
on sitting down and sitting in nature and just relaxing and reading as opposed to,
yeah,
so I'm really happy to hear that it's not just a few people that I work with. It's probably that are
yeah.
interested. I also, I see this on Twitter with some of our mutual people that we follow with
Hmm.
the growing interest in this kind of way of approaching the world. And I wish I could remember there's that reading group, and I wish I could remember so I could plug them in this conversation.
Hmm.
Don't they have like a hundred?
The Athenium reading group.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you. Don't they
yeah.
have like 100,000 followers or something for 10,000?
Yeah, I think just like a month or two ago, they got retweeted by Elon Musk, and then all of a sudden they've been a reading group for a while, and then Musk had retweeted them or said something like in relation to it, and then it kind of it's gone all bonkers. It definitely exploded in the last month.
Glad to hear that. What question have I not asked you that you'd like to answer?
Uh, Good. That's a great question. Um, I think the question, man, um, now I feel like I'm on the spot, but that's good. Uh, yeah, as far as the idea of books, I think the big question that I would want to make sure is asked and answered, would have to do with how to make sure that this is sustainable. Um, and so here's what I mean by that. Sometimes when it comes to the book stuff that people might see online, it can become it can become very overwhelming, just like any sort of like new hobby. People get really into diet, fitness, and exercise stuff, and within a week they're burned out, right? Because they've never done it before. And so some of the comments that I have fielded online, because I mostly just post about book stuff. That's just kind of the interesting thing that I found on Twitter. I kind of just kind of lean into it. Um, that seems to work. Sometimes people have commented or have DM'd me about how they feel overwhelmed because they can't sort of keep up with, say, with like the book influencers. I don't really like the idea of a book influencer because I think the world of influencers, it has to move so quickly that people feel the pressure. It's like I have to post about a book I read today, and then tomorrow I have to read a whole new book and post about that book tomorrow. Um, so, what I would tell people if they're asking the question about how to get involved in books is I tell them this. I personally, I only read 1 hour a day, and it's usually from 8 to 9 at night. I just like to read 8 to 9 at night, and then I just go to bed. Um, so just because you see or connect with somebody like me online who's always talking about books, it doesn't mean I'm just reading books 8 to 10 hours a day. It doesn't mean that I'm reading a book a day. I average about a book a week. I'm fortunate that part of my job as a professor is to kind of keep up with some reading. Um, but just make a consistent schedule that works for you. And the same is true with, diet and exercise. Um, if
Mhm.
you can only read for 30 minutes a day, over your lunch break, you're like 12:30 to 1:30 is all I get. Like, just make that your time and just read, 20, 30 pages over lunch and just make it consistent every day. Don't get overwhelmed by like the bookish content you see thrown at you or be intimidated because you think somebody else is reading 1,000 pages a day. They're not. Uh, so for me, I read about a book a week, but it's also part of my profession. If you're a person who's like, I only want to read one book a month, that's fine. This is the mathematics that I do for myself. I find a book. I say, I want to read this in 7 days. It's 350 pages. That means I have to read 50 pages a day. And that kind of sets me up for about an hour a day. If you're a person who's like, I'm cool just reading one book a month, 30 days, right? I got to read 10 pages a day to finish a 300-page book in a month. So just the consistency of it, um, yeah, don't be intimidated by other people when it comes to their reading list or what they're reading or anything like that. Everybody starts somewhere with regard to their sort of like reading consistent. Just be consistent. Be consistent. Figure out a time that works for you. You want to read 50 books a year, great. You want to read 10 books a year, that's also great. Um, yeah, that's the sort of like general question when people say like, how do I get into this? Just pick up a book, read 10 pages, all right, and then pick up the same book tomorrow, read 10 more pages.
I like that. I was reminded of when I was a kid, reading is fundamental.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, where can people learn more about your writing, your work, your expressions on media?
Yeah. Um, so my Twitter X handle is at Josh Phillips PhD. That's the only social media I have. I'm a professor at Penn State. If anybody feels the need to Google me, they can kind of find, their avenue towards my faculty information as far as, my email, website and everything else. But yeah, I mean, Twitter X is where I'm kind of talking about and having these um conversations the most, and that's at Josh Phillips PhD. So yeah, come and connect. I like connecting with new people. I've like obviously we've connected, and so yeah, it's been a very fun time on online connecting with interesting people.
So, thank you, Josh. I appreciate your time and your insight.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Definitely encourage people to check you out on Twitter. Please do.
All
Have a
right.
great rest of your night and holiday weekend.
Yeah, you too.